Welcome to the tired thinker, where thought bends back to watch itself thinking, and meaning circles the drain of its own reflection. Tonight's mystery belongs to the loop, to circuits so perfect they swallow beginnings and ends whole. Self-reference is the quiet trickster of logic, the sentence that points to itself, the thought that becomes the thinker, the mirror reflecting a mirror until the image dissolves into infinite hallways of shimmering maybe. When a statement defines itself, who authored it? When a system includes itself in its own rules, what does outside even mean? If a loop loops forever, does it move or simply remain? These aren't puzzles to be solved, but spirals to inhabit, to rest inside the hum of the recursive, to feel the soft vertigo of realizing the observer is also the observed, that the question asking the question is the answer asking back. So tonight, we wander the narrow threshold where thought becomes the thing that thinks itself. No panic, only the gentle awe of minds tracing their own outlines. Before we begin, which loop finds you tonight? What little self-referential circle spins quietly in your corner of existence? If these contemplations curl comfortably into your consciousness, I'd be grateful if you liked or subscribed, so more curious travelers can wander into infinities that refuse to end. Now, let's begin. A sentence that writes itself seems like a trick. It sounds like a puzzle children pass around, yet the idea has weight. Language can refer back to itself. A sentence can describe itself. A thought can hold its own shape. That is the loop. Not a loop of time, but a loop of meaning. To understand it, we start simple. Say the sentence. This sentence has 5 words. You can count them. It matches. The sentence describes itself. Now say, this sentence lies. If it lies, it tells the truth. If it tells the truth, it lies. The sentence folds. The meaning turns inward. It becomes a loop without an outside point of reference. You cannot solve it. You can only watch it cycle. A self-writing sentence is a step further. It does not only describe itself. It acts. It shapes the next words. It sets its own frame. It functions like a mirror placed opposite another mirror. The reflection repeats with no end point. You do not find the first reflection because there is no first. There is only the loop. To feel this, imagine you try to write a rule book that contains every rule, including the rule about writing rules. At some point, the rule book must describe itself. It must say what it is. The moment it does that, the system bends inward. It includes the writer as part of the written thing. No outside observer remains. You are inside the loop. In language, this is called self-reference. In logic, it forms what is known as a strange loop. A strange loop happens when you move through steps in a system and return to where you began, but not in a simple circle. You return with a shift. The system knows itself. That is what makes the sentence that writes itself feel alive. It does not speak about the world outside. It speaks about the act of speaking. We see versions of this in daily life. When someone says, "I promise I am telling the truth," the person refers to the act of speaking while speaking. The words do not describe the world alone. They describe the speaker. They reach back and touch their own source. In art, this appears in stories about storytellers telling stories. A narrator explains how they choose each sentence while they speak it. The narration becomes the subject. The storyteller becomes a character in the act of telling. The shape folds in on itself. In thought, the loop appears when the mind examines itself. To think about thinking means the mind becomes both the tool and the object. You are the observer and the observed. The loop creates awareness. It also creates confusion. You try to step outside your own thoughts to see them, but the one stepping outside is just another thought. There is no vantage point beyond the loop. In programming, self-reference shows up in recursion. A function calls itself. If you code a function to print the word again and then call the same function, the output grows. It continues until it crashes or you stop it. The function depends on itself to run. No outside controller takes over. The instruction is the cause and the effect. This is the loop in logic form. The sentence that writes itself is the loop in language form. Consider a journal. A person writes in it each night. One day the person writes. The writer of this journal does not exist. The page denies its own author, but the act of writing proves the author. The sentence denies what the sentence depends on. The loop is not only logical, it is emotional. It creates tension in identity. If the writer wants the sentence to be true, the writer must disappear. Yet the writing continues. That is the core of self-reference. The system depends on what it denies or questions. Take another example. A teacher writes on the board, "Everything written on this board is false." If that sentence is on the board, then the sentence is false. But if it is false, then something written on the board must be true. We get stuck. The loop does not break. This is not only a logic trick. The human mind reacts to this loop. We search for stability. The loop denies stability. It invites us to accept that some statements do not resolve. They remain suspended. The sentence that writes itself can also describe its own creation. For example, this sentence came into existence when you began to read it. The act of reading is part of the sentence's meaning. The sentence is not complete until someone reads it. The reader becomes part of the loop. You are no longer outside the words. You help bring them into being. A more gentle form appears in instructions that apply to themselves. Please read this instruction carefully before reading this instruction. The loop carries a mild humor. It knows you cannot follow it without breaking it, yet you still try. The effort places your attention on the act of attention. Some writers use loops to show how identity is fluid. If you say, "I am the one who says I am me," you point to your own claim as the source of identity. There is no outside certificate. The self refers to itself. The claim holds because it holds. This loop is fragile. If the person stops speaking or stops believing, the loop dissolves. Yet while active, the loop is complete. Like language, identity can be self-authored. Now think of a person who worries about worrying. The person feels distress, not from the original problem, but from thinking about the feeling of worry. The loop layers itself. Each thought reacts to the previous thought. Soon the loop drives itself. No external cause remains. The loop continues because the loop continues. This affects mood, behavior, and direction. The cause and effect circle. Many emotional spirals share this form. To break them, one must step outside the loop. But stepping outside becomes difficult when the loop defines the sense of self doing the stepping. When language writes itself, we confront the same difficulty. We search for an outside perspective. We want a grounding point. Yet the structure denies that. The sentence does not point outward. It points inward. It does not describe the world. It describes the sentence. It builds itself by referring to itself. There is no origin you can track. The loop is the origin. To speak about the sentence that writes itself means entering the loop with it. These words are now reaching back to shape themselves while you read them. The meaning exists because you follow it. The act of reading completes it. The loop holds writer, reader, and sentence together. ... A mirror reflecting another mirror creates a hallway of images that seem to stretch without end. You stand between them and see yourself again and again, each version a little smaller, a little less clear. The first reflection feels familiar. The next ones feel distant. Soon, you cannot tell which image is real and which is only a copy of a copy. This is reflection multiplying past recognition. It shows what happens when something simple repeats itself with no boundary to stop it. The idea applies not only to glass, but to thought, identity, and memory. When a person looks into a mirror, they see themselves. The reflection shows the face, the posture, the way the shoulders rise or fall. It is direct. You know the reflection depends on you. It has no life on its own. But when you place a second mirror across from the first, the reflection no longer stops at one. The image reflects itself. The first reflection becomes the object in the second. The second becomes the object in the third. You get a chain of images, and each one exists because of the one before it. The source becomes hard to track. You know the original is you, yet the image you see many reflections deep looks almost unrelated. This same process appears in thought. The mind can reflect on the world, and it can also reflect on its own reflections. You can have a feeling. Then you can think about having the feeling. Then you can judge the thought about the feeling. The loop builds. At some point, the original feeling is gone. What remains is the echo of the echo. You react not to the event itself, but to your perception of it. The reflection has multiplied. Consider someone preparing to speak in front of others. The person first feels nervous. Then the person notices the nervous feeling and thinks, I should calm down. Then the person becomes worried about appearing nervous. Soon the original feeling is buried under reflections. The concern is no longer the talk. The concern is the reflection of how the concern will appear. The loop continues because there is no boundary that forces it to stop. Identity can also loop in this way. A person sees themselves in the eyes of others. Then they begin to see themselves in the reflection of how they think others see them. For example, a child hears praise for being smart. The child begins to think of themselves as someone who must be smart. Then the child begins to think about how others expect them to act smart. The reflection piles on reflection. The sense of self becomes distant from the original experience. The person becomes a reflection of a reflection. In social situations, we adjust ourselves based on how others respond to us. Over time, we may forget what came first. Did we laugh because we found something funny, or because others expected us to laugh? Did we speak in a certain tone because it felt natural, or because we imagined how it would look from outside? The source becomes unclear. Identity moves through mirrors without a single, stable point. Memory works in a similar pattern. When you recall an event, you do not retrieve the event itself. You retrieve the last time you remembered it. Each recall becomes another reflection. Over years, the original moment may fade. What remains is the repeated memory. The memory becomes a copy of itself. People sometimes argue about what really happened. Each person carries a memory shaped by layers of reflection. Both feel sure because memory presents itself as solid. Yet memory is a mirror through time. Language can create the same endless corridor. A word can describe something directly, but words also describe other words. A definition refers to another definition. If you trace them far enough, you may circle back to where you began. Meaning is built through relationships, not from a single fixed anchor. It is like looking into mirrors and trying to decide which reflection is the real one. The more you examine the chain, the less certain you feel about the original. In art, reflection upon reflection can create a powerful effect. A painter may paint a picture of someone looking at a painting. A filmmaker may show a character watching a movie inside the movie. The frame contains itself. The audience becomes aware that they are also watching, and so they become part of the loop. The boundary between observer and observed weakens. The artwork draws the viewer into the reflection. In daily life, you may notice loops when you see yourself behave in a way shaped by memory or habit rather than direct thought. You react because you reacted that way before. Past response reflects into the present one. The loop reinforces itself. If someone tells you that you always interrupt others, you may start noticing the habit. Then you may start noticing yourself noticing it. Soon, your reactions become layers of reflection rather than direct behavior. Some loops are harmless, others cause strain. When reflection multiplies without end, clarity weakens. The original image becomes hard to recognize. The person becomes unsure which reflection to trust. For example, a person may try so hard to appear confident that the effort itself becomes a sign of doubt. The reflection turns back on itself. The mirror multiplies but loses meaning. Yet reflection is not always a trap. It can also lead to awareness. If you notice the loop, you learn to see how your thoughts and identity form. You see the layers instead of being controlled by them. You do not need to break the mirrors. You only need to recognize that some reflections are distant copies. They do not need to guide action. You can choose to look at the nearest reflection, the one closest to the source. A mirror to the mirror teaches that repetition does not always lead to clarity. Sometimes more copies lead to confusion. But it also shows that the mind has the ability to observe itself. The act of noticing the reflection is part of the loop. Once you see the loop, you can decide where to place your attention. The idea of consciousness observing consciousness can feel abstract, but it begins with something familiar. You have thoughts. You also have the ability to notice those thoughts. You can feel a reaction arise and then step back from the reaction. The mind can look at itself. This is the spiral. It is not a circle because each turn moves to a slightly different level. You are not the same after each observation. The spiral changes as it loops. A simple example shows this. You feel frustrated because something did not go as planned. That is the first layer. Then you notice the frustration. You think, I should not be frustrated. That is the second layer. Then you notice the judgment of the frustration. You think, I am being hard on myself. That is the third layer. Each turn is the mind observing itself. The feeling becomes less about the event and more about your response to your own response. The process does not move in a straight line. It deepens. The mind appears to have two roles, the thinker and the observer. The thinker generates thoughts, reactions, opinions, and interpretations. The observer notices what the thinker produces. In daily experience, these roles can switch fast. You might be in the middle of speaking when you hear yourself speaking. You become aware of your tone or phrasing. In that moment, the observer wakes up. The spiral begins. Some people first notice this during quiet moments, such as sitting outside or lying down before sleep. A thought arises, then another thought evaluates it. You catch yourself thinking and say, I am thinking. You are not only thinking, you are aware of thinking. Many people do not realize this shift happens often. It appears subtle, but it shapes how we relate to our own minds. A spiral forms when reflection continues without ending. For example, consider someone who worries. The initial worry is about a real situation, but then the person becomes worried about the fact that they worry. Then they worry about how that worry affects their life. The spiral continues. If the person sees only the top layer, the spiral feels heavy. Yet, if the person notices the structure, they can understand it. The spiral is not a problem by itself. It is the structure of awareness, paying attention to itself. When consciousness observes consciousness, it can feel like stepping outside yourself. But there is no separate outside position. The same mind is doing both roles. This can cause confusion. People may describe feeling divided, but the division is not real. It is one system watching its own activity. It may feel strange because it is not physical. You cannot point to the observer. You can only notice the shift in attention. You can think of the spiral like an instrument tuning itself. A guitar does not hear itself. It needs a player. But the mind can tune its own responses. When you notice a pattern, you can change it. For example, if you often react with anger and you become aware of the reaction in the moment, the awareness provides space. The reaction loses automatic control. The spiral of awareness creates the possibility of choice. This does not mean you remove emotion or thought. It means you understand them as movement within the mind. The mind can watch the movement without being swept away by it. In cognitive behavioral therapy, this is known as metacognition. In meditation, it is known as mindfulness. In philosophy, it is called self-reflection. All point to the same structure, the spiral of observing thought from within thought. The spiral also appears in identity. You have a sense of who you are. Then you notice how that sense changes based on context. You may be confident in one environment and unsure in another. The self-image shifts. When you notice this shift, you become aware of identity as a fluid process. You are not locked into one version of yourself. The spiral allows movement. For instance, imagine a person who sees themselves as shy. They enter a situation and remain quiet. They notice themselves staying quiet and say, "I am acting shy again." Then they reflect on the reason, fear of judgment. Then they reflect on the fear itself. Each layer adds awareness. The person who observes can choose differently. The shy identity becomes one possible version, not the only one. Dreams also reveal this spiral. When you dream, your mind creates the dream, yet you are also inside it. Sometimes you realize you are dreaming. The dream continues, but awareness changes your place in it. Lucid dreaming is the mind observing the mind, while the mind creates the experience. The spiral appears even when the outside world is gone. In conversation, you may see yourself forming sentences while also listening to your own tone. You shape your speech as you speak. The observation guides the creation. The spiral is active. It does not interrupt life. It participates in it. This spiral can create clarity when recognized. It can also create confusion when unnoticed. If someone becomes trapped in thought about thought, they may feel overwhelmed. They may believe the thinking has no end. They may try to stop thought, but thought does not need to stop. What helps is learning to recognize the spiral as a natural form of mind. The mind reflects as part of its structure. A spiral does not close the way a circle does. Each loop returns near where it began, but not exactly. Each new observation changes how the next one unfolds over time. The person who observes their thoughts becomes different from who they were before observing. The mind grows by watching itself. It learns from itself. The spiral shows the mind that it is not static. When consciousness observes consciousness, the mind is both subject and object. This is not a flaw, it is a feature. It allows growth, adaptation, and understanding. The spiral continues because awareness continues. The movement does not need to resolve into a final point. The value is in the movement itself. A question that asks you back is not like a normal question. A normal question has a clear target. You ask for directions. You ask for the time. You ask how something works. The purpose is to receive an answer and move on. But some questions do not end after the answer. They continue. They attach themselves to the one who asked. These questions shape how a person sees themselves. They become part of identity. Inquiry becomes identity when the search keeps returning to the one searching. One of the earliest examples appears in childhood. A child asks, "Who am I?" At first, the question has a simple answer. Adults tell the child their name, their age, where they live. The answers satisfy the child for a while, but the question does not disappear. It shifts. The child grows older and begins to ask the same question in new forms. What kind of person am I? What do I believe? What is my place among others? The question now aims inward. The person is both the one asking and the one being examined. This type of question has no single answer because the answer changes over time. The person changes, and so the question continues. The question lives inside the person. It becomes part of how the person understands themselves. The inquiry is no longer about gathering information. It is about shaping identity. Another example occurs when someone faces a difficult decision. They ask, "What should I do?" At first, the question might seem like it concerns the situation, a job offer, a relationship, a move to a new place. But the question soon turns inward. What do I value? What do I fear? What am I trying to protect? The answer does not only tell them what to do, it tells them who they are. The question becomes a mirror. Sometimes people ask questions that they cannot let go of. Even when the surface situation has passed, a person who wonders, "Am I enough?" may continue to ask long after the conversation or event that triggered the question has ended. The question asks them back. It appears when they wake up, when they go to work, when they talk to others. It shapes behavior and self-perception. The question becomes a part of identity, even if the person does not choose it consciously. Philosophers ask broad questions about existence, knowledge, and meaning. These questions rarely end in final answers. Instead, they reveal the shape of the thinker. If someone spends years asking, "What is real?" the question forms the core of how they see the world. Another person might ask, "How should I act?" and build identity around ethics and responsibility. The inquiry becomes a path that defines the walker. We can also look at this through social identity. Consider someone who grows up hearing others ask them, "Why are you like this?" or "What is wrong with you?" Even if said casually or without intent to wound, such questions can echo. The person may begin to ask themselves the same questions. The inquiry shapes identity. A person can become the one who is always trying to justify their existence. They learn to respond instead of act. The question has become part of them. On the other hand, supportive questions can also shape identity. A teacher or mentor may ask, "What interests you?" or "What makes you feel alive?" A person who begins to explore these questions may find direction, curiosity, and self-respect. The inquiry becomes a source of growth instead of self-doubt. But in both cases, the structure is the same. The question does not remain outside. It enters the person and becomes part of how they understand themselves. Language reveals this structure. When someone asks, "What do I want?" the emphasis lands on the I. The question turns attention toward the one who speaks. The speaker is both the subject and the object of the sentence. The question describes the person while the person tries to answer it. Inquiry reflects back at the one who asked. This reflection occurs in therapy. A therapist may guide a person to ask, "What am I reacting to?" The act of asking begins to uncover patterns. The person learns to see their own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. The inquiry becomes a tool for understanding identity. It does not end with a single answer. Each answer leads to another question. The self observes the self. The question is part of the observation. Spiritual traditions also recognize this loop. Some forms of meditation use a single question, such as, "Who is thinking this thought?" The instruction is not to answer quickly. The purpose is to watch the question move through awareness. Each time the mind answers, the question repeats. The question begins to reveal the structure of consciousness itself. The one who asks and the one who answers are the same. The inquiry becomes identity. Self-doubt can also form a spiral. A person who repeatedly asks, "Do others accept me?" may begin to base identity on approval. The question asks them back each time they walk into a room. The person watches themselves through imagined eyes. The question shapes posture, tone, expression, and decisions. Over time, the original situation, perhaps one moment of rejection, fades. The question remains and becomes part of the person's internal life. Yet questioning can also create freedom. A person who asks, "Why do I believe what I believe?" may discover that many beliefs were inherited, absorbed, or assumed. The question opens space. It creates room for change. The question asks the person to become aware of themselves, not to defend themselves. The identity formed through this kind of questioning is flexible rather than fixed. The question that asks you back is not solved and set aside. It continues. It forms part of how you move, speak, and respond. It travels with you. It shapes the sense of self, not by providing answers, but by directing attention toward the one who is asking. The thought that remembers thinking is not the same as a simple memory. It is a memory that contains a record of the mind's movement at the time it formed. It is memory that remembers itself forming. Most people have felt this in quiet moments, though they may not have named it. You recall not only what you thought, but that you were thinking. The memory becomes a loop. It contains content and the awareness of the content. Consider a moment when you sat alone and reflected on a choice. You thought about what to do next, and you felt aware that you were weighing possibilities. Later, when you recall the moment, you remember your thought process, not only the outcome. You remember the shape of the thinking itself. That is a recursive echo. The mind becomes both the event and the witness of the event. The memory holds both layers. This kind of memory often appears in times of difficulty or transition. A person going through grief, for example, may have a moment where they recognize their own emotional state while they are experiencing it. They might think, "I am overwhelmed right now, and I know I am overwhelmed." Later, they remember not just the feeling, but the awareness of the feeling. The memory echoes itself. The mind remembers the mind remembering. We can contrast this with basic memory. Basic memory stores information. It records what happened. For instance, you may remember eating breakfast yesterday. You recall the meal, the location, the taste. This is straightforward. But if you remember thinking during breakfast about how fast life moves, and you remember noticing yourself having that thought, then the memory loops. You recall the event and the awareness of the event at the same time. The memory includes consciousness reflecting on itself. A recursive echo in memory forms without effort. The mind does this naturally. It is part of how identity holds continuity. If memory only held events, life would feel like disconnected snapshots. Instead, memory often holds the feeling of being the one who experienced the event. That sense of being the same person from moment to moment comes from the mind remembering itself thinking. A clear example occurs with learning. When you first learn a skill, like driving a car, your attention is on each step. You think about where to place your hands, how to use the pedals, when to look at the mirrors. You are aware that you are learning. Later, when the skill becomes automatic, you no longer think about each step. The awareness recedes. The early memories of learning feel vivid because they contain the awareness of thinking. The memory is not only, I learned to drive, but I remember thinking through each action as I learned. The recursive echo gives weight to the memory. The same happens when someone realizes something important about themselves. A person might recognize that they avoid conflict. At the moment of realization, they think, "This explains many decisions I have made." They are aware of the thinking itself. Years later, the memory remains clear, not because the events were dramatic, but because the awareness was active. The thought remembered itself. This can also lead to distortions. Memory based on recursive echo does not guarantee accuracy. When someone recalls a past emotional experience, they may remember the awareness more than the event. For instance, a person who felt anxious during a speech may later remember the anxiety vividly and little else. The awareness of thinking, "I am nervous," becomes the core of the memory. The details of the speech fade. The recursive echo highlights certain parts and lets others dissolve. Conversations often create this effect. A person may remember not what was said, but how they felt while thinking about what to say. They remember monitoring their tone, their posture, or the reaction of the other person. They recall thinking about thinking in the moment. The content of the words may fade, but the self-awareness remains. Memory holds the reflection, not just the scene. In relationships, this can shape identity. Someone may remember many moments where they thought about how they were perceived. Over time, these recursive memories create a sense of self as someone who watches themselves. The person becomes familiar with their own internal observer. The identity becomes one of reflection rather than direct experience. This is not always negative. The ability to remember thinking allows growth. If you reflect on a past reaction and you remember your awareness during the reaction, you can learn from it. You can recognize patterns. You can notice how the mind responds in similar situations. The recursive echo allows you to see change over time. You can say, "I used to think this way, and I remember knowing I thought that way." The awareness provides continuity. Dreams show a different angle. Many dreams fade because they lack the recursive echo. The dream may have vivid images, but if the dreamer did not realize they were dreaming, the dream feels distant when recalled. In contrast, when someone becomes aware within the dream, when they think, "I am dreaming," the memory stays clear. The mind remembers the moment of awareness. The recursive echo anchors the dream to waking identity. Meditation makes this structure easier to see. When someone sits quietly and watches thoughts arise, they begin to notice that thoughts are events in the mind. They also notice themselves noticing. The memory of meditation often contains the awareness of watching thought. The person remembers the process, not only the content. The recursive echo is the experience itself. Language even reflects this structure. When someone says, "I remember realizing," the sentence already contains the loop. The memory does not stand alone. It contains thought reflecting on itself. The syntax reveals the shape of consciousness. The thought that remembers thinking creates continuity, identity, confusion, clarity, and reflection. It is the mind holding its own movement, echoing across time. A name with no speaker suggests an identity that exists without a clear source. At first, this seems impossible. We learn names from others. Someone calls us by a word, and we begin to answer to it. Yet identity is not only the result of being named, it continues to shape itself long after the original act. A person can hold a sense of self without knowing where it began. This sense can form from repetition, memory, and reflection. The name becomes something the person carries, even if they no longer remember who spoke it first. Think of how infants develop identity. A child hears their name spoken by caregivers. At first, the child does not know the name refers to them. It is only a sound. Then recognition forms. The sound becomes connected to the body, the face, the feeling of being held. Eventually, the child responds. The name becomes a signal to turn, to look, to act. Yet the child did not choose the name. It came from outside. The identity begins with something given. Over time, the given name feels like it originates from within. The boundary between external label and internal identity dissolves. The name no longer feels like something applied. It feels like something lived. Consider someone growing older and hearing their name spoken less often. Adults do not get called by their name as much as children do. Yet they still carry the identity. They think of themselves as the one who answers to that word. Even when alone, the person holds the sense of being someone. They wake up and recognize their own presence. They do not need to hear the name spoken to know who they are. The identity loops inside the mind. It refers to itself. It maintains itself. This process does not stop at the level of names. The same looping occurs with traits and roles. A student becomes someone who studies. A parent becomes someone who cares for children. A leader becomes someone who guides others. But if you ask any of these people when they became that identity, the answer is not always clear. There is no single moment. The identity forms gradually. It emerges from repeated action and repeated thought about the action. The source is difficult to locate. The identity sustains itself by referring to its own shape. It becomes a name with no speaker. Memory plays a role in this. Memory does not store events as exact recordings. It stores interpretations. When someone remembers being shy as a child, they may see themselves as a shy person now. They carry the trait forward. The identity refers to itself through remembered patterns. Over many years, the original cause is forgotten. The person does not remember who first called them shy or why. The identity continues without a clear origin. It loops. Social interaction reinforces this loop. People reflect each other's identities back to them. If many people treat someone as responsible, the person begins to act responsible. They see themselves through others' reactions. But if asked who first decided this, no one remembers. The identity simply continues because it continues. The loop holds itself in place. The speaker disappears. Only the name remains. A more intense example appears in situations where identity forms from internal thought rather than external assignment. Someone might think, I'm the type of person who needs to achieve. They repeat this thought often. They behave according to it. They feel discomfort when they do not meet their own expectation. But who first said this sentence? Often, there is no clear speaker. The thought emerged from a mixture of influences, observations, comparisons, and internal reflection. Over time, the thought became identity. The identity now sustains itself. The name no longer requires a speaker. The same can be seen in self-criticism. A person may think, "I'm not good enough." They may believe this statement as if it has always been true. They may feel the weight of it every time they attempt something new. But if asked when they first thought this, they might not know. The origin is unclear. It could have been one comment, or a moment of failure, or a comparison with others. The thought repeats, and repetition gives it authority. The identity grows from the echo. The speaker fades. This looping structure also appears in collective roles. Cultures create identities like hero, outsider, elder, or rebel. Individuals step into these roles without knowing who defined them first. The identity exists in language, in stories, in shared understanding. A person begins to fit themselves to the role. They see themselves through the story. The story has been told for generations, but no single speaker can be named. The identity is maintained by a group that does not need to trace its origin. The loop holds. Sometimes identity forms in the absence of external input. When a person spends long periods alone, they still maintain a sense of self. They may even develop new ways of describing who they are. They may talk to themselves in thought. They may form judgments about themselves. In these situations, identity arises from the mind observing itself. The mind becomes both speaker and listener. The loop is visible. The speaker and the hearer are the same. The name has no external origin, yet it functions. There are also moments when identity loosens. Someone might question who they are. They may realize that many of the traits they believed were essential were learned. They may notice that identity can shift based on environment, relationship, or stage of life. In these moments, the loop becomes visible. The person sees that identity can maintain itself without a clear beginning. They may not be able to identify who first shaped their sense of self. The speaker is gone, but the name remains active. The name with no speaker is identity sustained through repetition, interpretation, and self-reference. It loops inside the one who holds it, without needing an origin to stay alive. A dreamer inside the dreamer refers to a moment when awareness turns back on itself, while the mind is still forming experience. Most people have had a dream where they knew they were dreaming. They continued inside the dream, but something shifted. The dream did not feel the same. The dreamer and the witness of the dream were both present. One part lived the dream, another part watched. The mind held two places at once. The experience was nested, one layer inside another. This sense of layered awareness does not only appear in sleep. It can show up in waking life as well. For example, imagine someone walking home at night. They think about their day. They remember a conversation. They play back their own words. Then they notice that they are remembering. They become aware of the act of thinking. For a moment, they feel like both the one having the thought and the one observing it. The experience holds two levels. It is similar to dreaming of yourself dreaming. In a dream where you realize you are dreaming, you often feel a moment of clarity. You may say to yourself, This is a dream. The dream continues, but your relationship to the events changes. You recognize the dream does not obey physical rules. You may test the environment. You may fly or change scenes by intention. You may also feel a sense of calm because nothing in the dream can harm you in the usual way. The awareness becomes a part of the dream. The dreamer watches the dreamer. This layering can also happen in memory. Someone may recall a moment from childhood. They remember the event and how it felt, but they also remember who they are now, observing the memory. The self inside the memory and the present self are not the same. Both exist in the memory at once. The memory becomes a nested reality. One version of the person acts inside the scene. Another stands outside, watching. This nested structure appears in thought. The mind can think, and it can also think about thinking. When someone becomes aware of their thoughts, they are, in a sense, dreaming while awake. The thoughts create a world. The awareness observes the world. The dreamer inside the dreamer is the structure of consciousness reflecting on itself. People sometimes experience this during strong emotional states. Someone might feel anxious and notice that they feel anxious. They observe the feeling while it happens. They might say internally, "I am anxious, and I know I am anxious." The awareness becomes a second position inside the same moment. This does not remove the emotion, but it changes the relationship to it. The person is no longer only inside the emotion. They are also outside, looking. Stories sometimes illustrate this structure. A character in a book may realize they are in a story. They may speak to the reader. They may question the narrator. The narrative folds inward. The story contains the awareness of the story. The world inside the book watches itself. The dreamer inside the dreamer appears in fiction as well as in the mind. In some traditions of meditation, the instruction is to observe thoughts without trying to change them. A person sits quietly. Thoughts arise, memories appear, plans form. The instruction is to notice the thoughts and let them pass. The person begins to see that the thoughts come and go, but the awareness remains. This awareness is like the dreamer who knows they are dreaming. The thoughts are like the dream world. The nested structure becomes clear. One layer changes, one layer does not. In lucid dreams, the moment of waking inside the dream is often subtle. It may feel like a small shift in weight. A doorway opens between two layers of awareness. The dream continues, but you know it is a dream. Some people try to stay in this state. Others wake soon after noticing. The balance is delicate. The mind can hold both roles, but not always for long. There are experiences in waking life that resemble lucid dreaming. One example occurs when someone feels deeply absorbed in a task, then suddenly steps back in awareness. They might have been writing, drawing, or speaking. They notice themselves doing it. They see their own focus. The awareness comes forward. The activity continues. The mind holds two layers, being inside the action and watching the action. Nested realities also appear in identity. A person might act according to a role, such as a worker, parent, or friend. Then they may notice their own role while acting it. They see themselves performing. They see themselves adjusting their posture, tone, or word choice. The identity becomes layered. The self that acts is inside. The self that watches is outside. Both are real, both operate together. Dreams offer an even deeper example. In some dreams, the dreamer believes they have woken up. They move around a room that looks like their room. They think they are awake. Then something in the dream reveals itself as impossible. A detail does not align. A clock face changes every time they look at it. The person realizes they are still dreaming. They wake within the dream again. The structure deepens. The dreamer wakes inside the dreamer, who thought they were already awake. The same structure can appear in waking life when someone questions their beliefs. They may hold a conviction. Then they see themselves holding the conviction. They reflect on how they came to believe it. The awareness steps outside the belief. The belief becomes something observed. The nested layers of self-awareness resemble the layers of dreaming inside dreaming. This nested structure does not need to be dramatic. It can occur in quiet moments. Someone sits near a window and watches the world. They think about their life. Then they notice themselves thinking. Then they notice the one who notices. The awareness folds inward. Each layer reveals another. The dreamer inside the dreamer is simply the mind seeing itself. A system that defines its own boundaries may appear complete, yet it does not rely on anything outside itself to explain what it is. It contains its rules, language, and meaning within its own structure. The idea of a gate with no outside points to a boundary that encloses everything relevant. There is no space beyond the gate because the system determines what counts as inside and what counts as possible. To someone within such a system, the idea of an outside may not make sense. The system loops and sustains itself. Consider language. A language does not require an external authority to explain what its words mean. Words gain meaning from how they relate to other words. A dictionary defines one word with other words. The definitions circle. You look up a word, and the explanation uses more words that depend on other words. The meaning comes from relationships, not from something outside. Language is a system that forms a boundary around itself. It does not need to reach outside to function. A person can live their entire life in one language and never need a reference point outside that language. The gate stands, but there is no outside to step into. This structure appears in personal identity. A person may describe who they are based on their experiences, preferences, values, and history. Those descriptions refer back to the person. The identity shapes how experiences are interpreted, and the interpretations reinforce identity. If someone says, "I am cautious," they may approach new situations carefully. The careful behavior reinforces the identity of being cautious. The identity becomes self-sustaining. When asked why they are this way, they may say, "It is who I am." The explanation loops. The boundary of identity defines itself from within. The gate has no outside reference. You can see this shape in belief systems. A set of beliefs can support itself through internal logic. Someone may believe an idea because it matches another belief they already hold. When asked why they hold the first belief, they point back to the second. If you trace the reasoning long enough, you return to where you began. The beliefs validate one another. The system sustains itself. There is no need for an external explanation. The gate holds. The outside remains undefined. Mathematics also contains systems with internal definitions. In formal logic, axioms are statements accepted without proof. All other statements derive from them. The system builds itself from the inside. If you ask where the axioms came from, there is no answer within the system. They are the foundation. They define the space of possible proofs. There is no outside where the axioms are justified. The system begins and ends with itself. Social groups can work the same way. A community may form its norms, expectations, and values internally. Those norms shape how people act, and the actions reinforce the norms. Over time, the group may not need to explain why things are done a certain way. The reason becomes, this is how we do it. The rule sustains the practice, and the practice sustains the rule. The system is complete within itself. To someone outside, the rules might seem arbitrary. To someone inside, they feel natural. The gate is visible only from the outside, but from within, it is simply the world. This can also be seen in thought loops. A person might hold a belief that they are unworthy. They interpret experiences through that belief. If someone compliments them, they may think the compliment is insincere. If someone criticizes them, they see it as confirmation. The belief interprets the evidence, and the interpretation reinforces the belief. The thought structure forms a closed loop. Asking the person to justify the belief may cause them to reference past feelings that were themselves shaped by the belief. The gate defines the boundary. There is no clear outside to step into. Imagine someone raised in a place where certain behaviors are considered normal and unquestioned. They do not see these behaviors as chosen. They see them as simply the way things are. When they encounter a different cultural practice, they may feel confusion, not because the new practice is wrong, but because it falls outside their system. Their worldview shaped their sense of what is possible. If they step into the new system long enough, it may begin to feel normal. The boundary shifts. The gate moves with the person. The mind often builds internal systems that guide perception. If someone believes the world is unsafe, they notice threats more readily. They interpret neutral expressions as hostile. Each observation reinforces the worldview. The world appears to validate the belief. The belief shapes the observation. The observation shapes the belief. The system closes. The world inside the gate feels complete. Not all self-defining systems are restrictive. Some allow growth. For example, someone might adopt the identity of a learner. They see themselves as curious. When they encounter something new, they interpret the experience as an opportunity to learn. The identity supports exploration. The exploration reinforces the identity. The boundary remains internal, but it opens rather than closes. Even here, the system defines itself. The gate stands, but it admits motion. To understand a gate with no outside is to recognize that many structures in thought and life do not rely on external validation. They draw their meaning and shape from within. The boundary exists not to keep something out, but to define what counts as real within the system. A person living inside such a system may feel stable, confused, trapped, or free depending on how the system functions. But the system itself stands by its own structure. It holds its own form. An image that contains the gallery suggests a representation that holds within itself the space where it is displayed. At first, the idea seems like a playful trick, but it points to a real structure in thought and perception. A picture can show not just a scene, but the act of viewing the scene. A description can describe the world and also describe the act of describing. When this occurs, the boundary between the thing and the view of the thing becomes unclear. The world folds back on itself. Imagine a painting hanging in a museum. Visitors stand in front of it. The room has lights, polished floors, and quiet footsteps. Now imagine the artist paints a picture of the museum itself, including the walls, the lighting, the benches, the visitors, and even the painting hanging on the wall. The painting now contains the space in which it is displayed. The viewer sees themselves reflected in the artwork. The image is not only an object, it becomes a mirror of the act of viewing. This structure appears in thought. When someone thinks about the world, they create an internal model of it. They picture events, relationships, and possibilities. But the model also includes the thinker. They think about their place in the world. Their understanding of the world includes themselves standing within it. The mind becomes both the gallery and the image. The understanding contains the one doing the understanding. The loop forms naturally. Language demonstrates this structure. When someone describes a scene, they choose words that convey not only what is seen, but the perspective from which it is seen. If someone says, "I looked out the window and saw the street," the sentence contains both the scene and the observer. The description includes the one describing. The world is not presented as separate from the describer. The gallery is inside the image. Memory works the same way. When you remember something, you recall not only the event, but the experience of being there. You remember your presence in the memory. The memory contains both the scene and the one witnessing it. This becomes more visible with strong memories, such as moments of change, loss, or joy. The memory holds the image and the awareness of the image. The world is inside the recollection. Stories often use this structure on purpose. In literature, a narrator may step out of the narrative and comment on the act of telling the story. They may say, "You may wonder why I mention this," or "I realized this only later." The story contains the storyteller. The reader becomes aware that the story is not only about events, but about reflection on those events. The image holds the gallery. Self-perception follows a similar pattern. A person sees themselves through the lens of their own thoughts. They have an internal picture of who they are, but that picture influences how they act, and how they act influences the picture. The identity contains the frame that holds it. For example, someone who thinks of themselves as a kind person may act kindly, which reinforces the identity. The self-image contains the observer and the observed. The loop sustains itself. Art provides clearer examples. A filmmaker may include scenes where characters watch themselves on a screen. The film then reflects its own making. The audience sees the characters watching what the audience is also watching. The frame repeats. The world folds into itself. The viewer becomes part of the scene. In philosophy, this structure is known as reflexivity. A system becomes aware of itself. When self-awareness is part of the system, the representation includes the act of representation. The image contains the gallery. The mental model contains the one who built the model. This can lead to confusion when someone tries to step outside their own perspective. A person can attempt to view themselves as if from a distance. They may try to see what others see, but they are still using their own mind to view their own mind. The observer cannot step outside the system that defines them. The gallery cannot leave itself. The image always includes the one perceiving. The same occurs in science. Scientists observe the world and record their observations, but the tools and theories they use also come from the world they observe. When a scientist studies the brain, they use the brain to understand the brain. The system studies itself. The image studies the gallery. Even simple beliefs show this pattern. If a person believes the world is hostile, they notice signs of hostility. They interpret events through that belief. Their world contains their belief about it. The belief shapes perception, and the perception reinforces the belief. The world inside the mind and the mind inside the world reflect one another. Consider someone who draws a map of a city. The map represents streets, buildings, and directions, but the map exists inside the city. The representation is part of what it represents. The image contains the gallery. The city holds the map that describes the city. The same structure occurs in emotions. A person may feel sadness. They notice their sadness and feel sadness about being sad. The emotion reflects itself. The experience contains the awareness of the experience. The loop deepens. The world of emotion includes the observer of emotion. When someone realizes this nested structure, they may feel disoriented. They may wonder whether there is any view that stands outside the system. But the structure is not a flaw. It is part of consciousness. To experience the world is always to include oneself in the experience. The image that contains the gallery is not only a metaphor. It is a pattern of awareness that exists in perception, memory, identity, and thought. The world and the one who sees the world form a recursive pair. The description includes the describer. The frame includes the one who frames it. A key that unlocks itself suggests a solution that does not come from outside. It points to something that resolves a problem using the very structure that created the problem. At first, this seems like a contradiction. We are used to the idea that a lock and a key are separate. One is the problem, the other is the solution. But some systems do not work this way. They contain both the difficulty and the resolution in the same place. The system does not need outside help. It uses its own form to shift itself. Language offers a clear example. If someone asks what a word means, we look to other words. The explanation relies on the same system in which the original question appeared. The dictionary does not need a source beyond itself to define words. The meaning is created through relationships. Words explain other words. If a person stays inside the same language long enough, the system feels complete. The key to understanding the language is already within the language. Thought works in a similar way. When someone faces confusion, they often try to step outside their thoughts to solve it, but the solution usually arises within the same mind that is confused. They think through the problem. They notice assumptions. They shift perspective. Nothing external enters. The mind unlocks itself. One part of the mind observes another part. The awareness becomes both key and lock. The system resolves itself by seeing itself differently. Emotional understanding can work this way as well. A person may feel upset without knowing why. They may avoid the feeling, hoping something external will fix it. But clarity often arrives when they allow themselves to feel the emotion fully. The act of paying attention to the feeling becomes the key. They notice what they are reacting to. They recognize the pattern. The emotional knot loosens from inside. The one feeling the emotion is also the one who understands it. The gate opens because the mind turns toward itself. In mathematics, there are proofs that show certain statements are true based on the structure of the system they belong to. They do not appeal to anything beyond the defined rules. The validity rests inside the framework. The system locks and unlocks itself through internal consistency. A smaller, everyday example appears when someone learns to ride a bicycle. At first, the process feels unstable. The rider wobbles and tries to correct balance through direct effort. But balance does not come from forcing control. It comes from understanding how motion supports itself. The rider learns to lean, steer, and move in a way that stabilizes the bike. The act of moving creates the stability required to stay upright. The solution is in the movement itself. The motion unlocks the balance. Nothing external is added. Identity can show the same pattern. Someone may question who they are and look outward for answers. They may ask others for feedback, approval, or definition. But identity often clarifies when the person pays attention to their own experience. They notice what they choose, what feels natural, and what feels forced. The answer does not come from others. It comes from watching themselves act. The self understands the self. The identity unlocks itself from within. This structure appears in creativity. When a writer faces a blank page, they may think the problem is lack of ideas. They may look outside for inspiration, but often the ideas appear once the writer begins to write. The act of beginning generates direction. The process reveals itself through doing. The key was not something the writer lacked. It was the willingness to start. The work unlocks itself through the act of working. Some problems seem insoluble because they are approached with the wrong frame. For example, someone might try to stop worrying by forcing themselves not to worry. Yet the more they try to stop, the more they focus on the worry. The effort strengthens the loop. The solution appears when they shift attention to noticing the worry rather than fighting it. The act of noticing changes the relationship. The lock opens when the mind stops pulling on it. Key was already part of the structure. The shift is internal. Systems with internal solutions do not imply isolation. They show that the system has enough structure to adjust itself. The movement toward resolution comes from recognizing what is already present. The key does not appear from outside. It emerges when the system sees itself clearly. This can even be seen in group dynamics. A group may face disagreement. They might think they need an outside authority to resolve it. But resolution often comes when members speak openly about what each person values. The clarity comes from listening, not from external rule. The group discovers alignment through its own communication. The key comes from within the group. The structure unlocks itself by recognizing its own tensions and shared needs. Another example appears in learning how to understand fear. Someone might try to push fear away. They may try to distract themselves or ignore the feeling. But fear tends to grow when avoided. It loosens when acknowledged. When a person names their fear and feels it without resistance, the fear begins to shift. The act of recognition is the key. The fear opens because it no longer needs to defend itself. The key was already part of the lock. A key that unlocks itself invites a different approach to problems. Instead of seeking solutions outside, it encourages looking at how the system functions. Many difficulties persist not because the solution is absent, but because the person is looking elsewhere. When the system is seen clearly, change can arise without external intervention. The structure of self-contained solutions does not come from force. It comes from attention. When something is understood from within, the lock shifts. The system resolves itself. The key is not separate. It is the shape of the lock, seen from another angle. A circle that never claims its center describes a shape with no clear beginning, no end, and no single point that defines its meaning. When you look at a circle, you see a complete form. You can trace it in either direction, and the path is the same. There is no first point on the line. The circle continues because it continues. The center is implied, but the shape does not require a marked point to hold together. The form is stable without needing to state where it starts. This pattern appears in many parts of experience. Time often feels like a circle. Days repeat. Seasons return. Even though events change, the structure remains. You wake, move through the day, rest, and begin again. The cycle does not need a starting moment. If you try to choose one, you can always look further back. You woke today because you woke yesterday. You woke yesterday because of the day before. The circle continues. The origin is not required. Identity can form in the same way. A person may describe themselves, but their description depends on their history, habits, and memories. When they try to find a single defining moment that made them who they are, they cannot. Each moment leads to another. The person they were shaped the person they are now, and the person now will shape who they become. The self loops. There is continuity without a primary cause. The person is a circle that never claims its center. A conversation can show this structure. Two people talk. One responds to the other. The meaning arises from both sides. If you ask which came first, the thought spoken or the reaction, it is difficult to say. Each sentence gives context to the next. The dialogue forms a circle of shared meaning. The exchange does not rely on a single starting point to hold together. Language also carries this circular structure. Words define other words. Grammar rules refer to other rules. There is no single word or rule that exists outside the system. The language sustains itself from within. You can learn a language by immersion without being given a foundational first concept. Meaning emerges through repetition and relation. The center is distributed across the whole. Memory works in circles as well. When someone recalls a memory, they reshape it slightly based on who they are now. Their present self influences the memory, and the memory influences the present self. The past and present loop. There is no clear center. The memory changes each time it is remembered, but it still feels continuous. The circle holds even though no fixed point anchors it. A simple physical example makes this clearer. Think of a wheel. When it rolls, no single point on the rim leads the motion. The wheel turns, and each point takes its turn at the front. The motion does not require a leader. The structure provides its own order. The wheel continues as long as there is movement. The circle sustains the motion, and the motion sustains the circle. Belief can form a similar pattern. A person may believe something about the world. They interpret events through that belief. The interpretation reinforces the belief. If you ask why they believe what they believe, they may point to experiences shaped by the belief itself. The belief and the experience loop. The system does not need a starting point to function. Emotion sometimes follows this form. A person may feel sad, then feel sad about feeling sad. The emotion feeds itself. The awareness of the feeling becomes part of the feeling. The reaction loops. The original cause fades. The experience becomes self-sustaining. The circle continues without needing a center. The same structure can appear in relationships. Two people may describe each other in ways that reinforce their roles. One person becomes the responsible one. The other becomes the relaxed one. The behavior of each supports the role of the other. If you ask where this pattern began, neither may remember. The circle formed gradually. The identity of the relationship maintains itself. Understanding this circular structure does not require rejecting linear thinking. Linear thinking explains cause and effect, but many parts of life do not follow straight lines. They unfold in loops. When someone tries to force a clear origin, they may become frustrated. They may feel something is missing, yet nothing is missing. The structure simply does not have a first point to identify. The lack of a center does not mean the system is empty or vague. It means the meaning is spread across the whole. A circle gains its shape not from one point, but from the relation of every point to every other. In the same way, identity, memory, language, and emotional patterns gain meaning from their continuity, not from a single decisive moment. Consider learning. When someone learns a skill, they may not know when learning began. The skill develops through repetition, feedback, and adjustment. One moment does not define it. The skill shapes itself over time. If asked how they learned, they may describe the process rather than a starting point. The circle grows from within. Social norms follow this same pattern. A group behaves in a certain way. The behavior becomes expected. New members adopt the behavior because it is already present. The norm continues because it continues. The origin does not define the norm, the repetition does. When someone tries to find a single moment that explains everything about their life, they may overlook the real structure. The life is not built from one moment, it is built from the return. The repeated movement gives shape to the person. The circle holds the identity, the memory, the beliefs, and the relationships. The circle that never claims its center is a form that exists because of its continuity. It does not need a first point. It does not need a cause outside itself. It sustains itself by returning to itself. The form remains complete, even when no one point defines it. The meaning lives in the ongoing motion. A clock with no first tick suggests that time does not begin at a single moment. It is not a line that starts somewhere and stretches forward. Instead, it is a loop that continues because it continues. When we look at a clock, we see the hands move in a circle. The motion repeats. Noon returns. Midnight returns. The cycle does not need a first point to make sense. The rhythm exists without a beginning. We live inside that repetition. Yet we often speak as if time must have a starting place. The idea of a first tick feels natural, but when we examine experience, it becomes harder to locate such a moment. Think about waking in the morning. You open your eyes, you begin the day, but the day did not start because you woke. It continues from the day before, and that day continued from the one before it. If you try to find the first morning of your life, you may look for the moment of birth. Yet even that moment followed 9 months of development, and that development followed events that led to your existence, involving your parents, their parents, and so on. The search for a beginning can continue without reaching a final point. The clock keeps turning. This looping shape appears in the structure of daily routine. We sleep and wake in cycles. We eat, work, and rest in repeated patterns. Even thoughts follow familiar loops. We reflect on past experiences and plan for future ones. The past influences how we imagine the future. The imagined future influences how we interpret the past. The loop continues. Time is experienced not only as passing forward, but as returning. History shows this same pattern. Cultures rise, change, and repeat certain themes. Ideas return in new forms. Values shift, disappear, and reappear. People often say that history repeats itself. This phrase points to the loop. Details change, but the structure re-emerges. The clock turns, and familiar patterns return. Memory contributes to the loop as well. When you remember something, you bring the past into the present. The memory influences your current thinking. The present then shapes how you will remember the memory in the future. The past and present inform one another. They do not exist as separate locations on a straight timeline. They interact. They feed each other. Time bends back. Even emotion follows cycles. A person may feel sadness, then relief, then sadness again. The feeling is not simply a point that passes. it has a rhythm. The rhythm may be daily, seasonal, or tied to stages of life. When someone recalls their emotional history, they often notice that feelings return, not in the exact same form, but in patterns that echo earlier experiences. Time is not a single direction. It loops through memory and awareness. Language reinforces the loop. We speak of days coming and going. We say things come back around. We use words like cycle, return, and again. These words reflect how we live. Even when we imagine time as forward motion, the experience is cyclical. The clock face represents this clearly. The hands return to the same positions. The numbers circle. Yet we rarely question why we track time using a circle if we believe time is straight. Some scientific descriptions of time make the loop understandable. In physics, certain processes repeat in cycles: the orbit of the Earth, the phases of the Moon, the beating of a heart. These are rhythmic systems. They depend on repetition. If you look for a first cycle, the question extends backward. The motion continues without a clear starting event. Even the concept of beginning of the universe leads to questions that have no final answer. If one asks, what happened before the beginning? The question does not settle. The idea of a first tick becomes uncertain. A simple example shows how this structure functions in experience. Imagine a person standing on a shore watching waves. One wave arrives, then recedes, and another follows. The watcher might wonder which wave was the first, but the waves do not present themselves as individual events with beginnings. The waves are part of a continuous motion. Time moves like water, not like a line drawn on paper. In conversation, time loops as well. When two people talk, each reply references what was said before. Meaning builds in layers. Earlier statements shape later ones, and later statements reshape how earlier statements are remembered. The exchange is not linear. It circles through understanding. The looping shape of time becomes clearer when someone pauses to watch their own thoughts. A thought arises, another thought comments on the first, then another comments on the second. The mind moves in layers. New thoughts return to old themes. The clock inside the mind ticks in cycles rather than straight paths. A clock with no first tick does not imply that time is meaningless or directionless. It suggests that time gains meaning from repetition. The sense of rhythm gives structure to experience. The return allows understanding. Without repetition, the world would feel fragmented. The loop holds continuity. People often search for a point in life where everything began to make sense. They look for a turning moment, a defining event, a clear origin. But when they reflect deeply, the moment is never isolated. It is connected to what came before and what came after. The clarity comes from the loop, not from a single point. We live inside repetition. We mark time using cycles. We remember through patterns. The clock continues to turn, not because it began somewhere, but because the movement sustains itself. Time imagined as a loop allows us to see the continuity of experience instead of searching for a first tick that cannot be located. A story that reads its reader does not sit still on the page. It shifts depending on the person engaging with it. The same text can feel comforting to one person, unsettling to another, or dull to someone else. The words do not change, the reader changes. The interpretation shapes the story, and the story shapes the interpretation. The narrative reflects the one perceiving it. When this occurs, the boundary between story and reader becomes uncertain. The reading becomes a mirror. Think about someone reading a novel during different stages of life. At age 12, the story might feel like an adventure. At age 20, the same book might feel like a commentary on purpose. At age 50, it might read like a reflection on memory and time. The text did not shift. The reader carried a different self to the page. The story reads the reader by showing them what they are ready to see. This happens in daily interactions with art and language. When someone listens to a song, they hear themselves in it. If they are sad, the song may sound sad. If they are hopeful, the same song may sound bright. The music becomes a container for emotion. The listener fills it. The song reflects the emotional state back to the listener. It reads them. Stories also work through identification. A reader may see themselves in a character. It might feel recognized by the character's flaws, habits, or decisions. Another reader may not notice those traits at all. The character acts like a lens. It highlights parts of the reader's own life that are already active. The narrative does not choose who to speak to. The reader completes the narrative by placing themselves inside it. The story reads the reader by revealing what the reader relates to. Memory strengthens this effect. A person may remember certain parts of a story and forget others. The memory of the story becomes intertwined with personal experience. If the person reads the story again, they might be surprised by how much they misremembered or by what they overlooked. The earlier reading was shaped by their identity at that time. The new reading is shaped by who they are now. The story continues to change because the reader continues to change. In conversation, narratives take shape in the same way. When someone tells a story about their life, they highlight certain details and leave others out. The listener interprets the story based on their own experience. Two people can hear the same account and walk away with different understandings. The interpretation comes from within the listener. The story speaks with one voice, but it is heard in many ways. Each listener reads themselves into the narrative. This structure also appears in self-narration. People tell stories about who they are. They recall experiences and arrange them into meaning. These stories shape identity. Over time, the stories influence how people act, which then influences the stories they tell next. The narrative and the self reflect one another. If someone changes how they tell their story, they change who they understand themselves to be. The self reads the story, and the story reads the self. An example shows the loop clearly. Someone loses a job. They can tell themselves a story, "I failed," or they can tell themselves another story, "This will help me change direction." Both stories use the same event. The chosen narrative influences how the person behaves next. If they believe the first story, they may retreat. If they believe the second, they may seek new opportunities. The story reads the person by shaping what they believe possible. This dynamic is also present in cultural narratives. A culture tells stories about progress, community, or identity. People grow up inside these stories. They internalize them. Later, they interpret their own lives through those narratives. Someone raised in a culture that values independence may understand their struggles as opportunities for self-reliance. Someone raised in a culture that values interdependence may understand the same struggles as signs to seek support. The cultural story reads the person's life for them. Yet the person also interprets and reshapes the cultural story through how they live. Dreams show the same loop. In a dream, the dreamer encounters situations that reflect their internal state. The images may seem random, but they arise from memory, fear, desire, and emotion. When the person remembers the dream, they interpret it. The interpretation reveals what the dreamer believes about themselves. A dream is a story created by the mind. The interpretation is also created by the mind. The mind reads itself through the dream. This structure appears whenever the observer is part of what is observed. When someone reads a story, they bring themselves to the reading. Their history, feelings, and expectations shape how the story unfolds in their mind. The story becomes a surface where identity reflects itself. The narrative does not only describe events, it reveals the reader's relationship to those events. Some people notice this when they revisit childhood stories. They may be surprised to find new themes that were invisible before. The story did not change, the reader changed. The narrative reveals the new self. It reads the reader by showing what resonates now that did not resonate before. The same can occur in ordinary experiences. If someone approaches a situation expecting hostility, they may interpret neutral expressions as threatening. The situation becomes a story shaped by expectation. The person reads the situation through their belief. The situation reads the person by returning that belief. Stories are not passive. They work with the mind that takes them in. They gain shape through interpretation. They reveal identity by showing which parts of them come alive in the reader. The story reads the reader by reflecting their concerns, hopes, memories, and fears back to them in the language of narrative. The observer inside the observation refers to a situation where awareness watches something, yet it cannot remove itself from what it observes. When you look at a mountain, you see it from a distance. You stand apart from it. But when you look at your own thoughts, there is no distance. The mind observing is the same mind being observed. There is no outside vantage point. Awareness turns inward and finds itself already present. This creates a loop in which the observer and the observed are the same. This becomes clear when someone tries to examine their motivations. They may ask why they feel a certain way. To answer, they look inward. But the one asking the question is the same one generating the feelings. There is no neutral point from which to observe. The awareness is part of the system it tries to examine. When someone says, "I am trying to understand myself," they are both investigator and subject. The observation contains the observer. Thought reveals this loop often. A thought appears, such as, "I am worried." Another thought follows, "I should not worry." The second thought comments on the first, but both thoughts arise in the same mind. The mind tries to control itself. There is no separate agent giving commands. The internal commentary is just another layer of thought. The observer is part of the observation. This can be seen when someone watches their breath. They breathe, and they notice they are breathing. The act of noticing affects the breath. The breath changes because the attention changed. Awareness influences the object of awareness. The observer cannot step outside the process. It is included in it. People often believe they can view themselves objectively. They imagine a viewpoint that stands outside personal history, emotion, and interpretation. But any perspective they adopt is formed from their experiences and beliefs. Even the attempt to be objective reflects a worldview. The observer shapes what they see. They cannot lift themselves out of the structure that produces their thoughts. The observation is colored by the observer. Memory makes this more complex. When someone remembers an event, they recall not only what happened, but how they felt about it. The memory is shaped by the present understanding. A person may think they are observing an event from the past, but they are observing a version of that event filtered through who they are now. The observer is inside the memory. They cannot separate themselves from the interpretation. This becomes clearer during strong emotions. When someone feels angry, they may notice their anger and try to release it. But the noticing is not separate from the emotion. The awareness is inside the experience. The anger influences how the person sees the situation, and the awareness is colored by the anger while trying to examine it. The observer cannot stand outside, they are already included. Meditation practices highlight this structure. When someone sits quietly and watches their thoughts, they may notice that thoughts come and go without effort. The person might try to find the source of the thoughts. They look for the one who is thinking, but each time they look, the one looking is part of the thought process. The observer cannot find itself because it is the activity of observing. There is no separate thinker standing outside thought. A simple example can show the loop clearly. Imagine a flashlight shining into a dark room. The flashlight can illuminate objects in the room, but the flashlight cannot shine light on itself unless it uses a mirror. And even then, what it sees is only a reflection produced by the same light. The observer cannot observe itself directly. It sees itself through its effect. Awareness works the same way. Language adds another layer. When someone describes themselves, they use concepts formed through past experience and social context. If they say, "I am patient," that description comes from memories. If they say, "I am impatient," the statement comes from the same structure. The description is not separate from the one describing. The observer shapes the narrative they claim to observe. Consider someone who tries to see themselves the way others see them. They may imagine how they appear to others, but that imagination is produced by their own mind. It is still internal. They cannot step into another person's perception directly. The observer remains inside the observation. Even scientific observation shows this pattern. When scientists observe something, they use tools and methods that are created within the same world they study. When they study the brain, they use reasoning that arises from the brain. The brain studies itself. The observer is part of what is observed. In everyday life, this loop appears in habits. Someone may act in a certain way and later reflect on why they acted that way. The reflection influences future behavior. The behavior influences future reflection. Awareness and action shape each other. There is no outside position to stand in. Try to notice the moment you decide something. You may think a decision happens first and action follows. But if you look closely, the desire, the thought, the evaluation, and the decision arise together. The observer who thinks they are choosing is part of the process. The process includes the observer. This also applies to beliefs. If someone believes the world is dangerous, they interpret events as threats. Their interpretation reinforces their belief. If they try to examine the belief, they do so through the lens of the belief. The observer cannot step outside to get a neutral view. The observer inside the observation does not prevent understanding. It shows that understanding happens from within. The mind sees the world and itself at the same time. Awareness does not need to leave itself to observe. It recognizes the loop. The observation contains the observer. And the observer is formed through the act of observing. The path that walks the traveler describes a movement in which the traveler shapes the road by walking, while the road shapes the traveler in return. It is not a one-way journey, it is an exchange. People often imagine a path as something fixed, something chosen first and followed after. But experience suggests something different. We do not simply walk a path. The path forms through walking, and as we move, the movement changes who we are. The traveler and the path develop together. Consider a person starting something new, such as learning a skill or entering a new phase of life. They may begin with an idea of what the journey will look like. They picture progress in steps, perhaps in a straight line. But once the person begins, The experience alters the direction. Mistakes, successes, curiosity, and difficulty influence the movement. The traveler chooses the direction, but the direction also influences the traveler. What seemed clear shifts. The path takes shape only through the act of taking steps. Walking in a forest can show this clearly. There may not be a trail at first. A person chooses a direction and begins to move. Their feet press the grass. They break twigs. They bend plants. Over time, if someone walks the same line again and again, a trail appears. The trail did not exist before the walking. It was made by movement. But then, once the trail is formed, it begins to guide the one walking. The path invites the feet to follow it. The traveler created the path, and the path now shapes the traveler's steps. This pattern appears in habits. When someone practices something repeatedly, such as speaking calmly or reacting with anger, the repetition shapes the brain. Neural pathways strengthen. The habit becomes easier to follow. At first, the person chooses how to respond. Later, the response feels automatic. The person shaped the habit, and the habit now shapes the person. The path walks the traveler. Identity follows the same pattern. Someone may believe they are patient. Because they believe this, they act patiently in many situations. These acts reinforce the identity. In time, patience becomes part of how they understand themselves. But where did the identity begin? Was there a first moment of patience, or did small actions accumulate until the trait felt natural? The identity and the behavior loop. The traveler and the path shape each other. This can also be seen in relationships. Two people meet and begin to interact. Each conversation shapes expectations. Each expectation shapes future conversations. Over time, a pattern emerges. The relationship moves in a certain way. If one person always comforts and the other always seeks comfort, the roles reinforce themselves. The interaction becomes familiar. The path of the relationship guides future steps, yet the relationship was formed by the people in it. They created the pattern, and now the pattern influences them. The same structure shows up when someone pursues a goal. They may start with a clear image of what they want, but the process of moving toward the goal changes them. They encounter challenges that develop new traits. They learn skills. They shift priorities. Sometimes the original goal no longer fits who they have become. The traveler has changed through the journey. The path shaped them, and now the path may need to change because they are no longer the same person who began walking. There are also times when someone tries to follow a path chosen by others. They may do what is expected or what is conventional. But if the path does not match who they are, walking it can feel like forcing steps along a direction that does not fit. In these cases, the path shapes the traveler in ways that feel strained. The person may adapt to meet the expectations of the path. Yet over time, they may notice discomfort, resistance, or a sense of misalignment. The path still walks the traveler, but the movement does not feel natural. In contrast, when someone follows a path that aligns with their internal direction, the movement feels consistent. They learn from the process without feeling forced. Challenges still occur, but the effort does not feel out of place. The traveler grows in ways that feel connected to their own nature. The path and the traveler develop in mutual support. This pattern can also be noticed in thought. A person thinks certain thoughts often. The thoughts shape their worldview. The worldview influences future thoughts. If someone repeatedly thinks, "I must not fail," they may become cautious. The caution shapes how they act. The life shaped by caution reinforces the original thought. The thought created the path, and the path now strengthens the thought. The traveler walks, but the path also walks the traveler. To become aware of this loop is to notice how movement and identity influence one another. It does not require blame or judgment. It simply requires attention. When someone notices that a path is shaping them, they may ask whether that path suits them. They may begin to shape the path with intention rather than habit. The mutual influence remains, but awareness shifts how the process unfolds. Even the simple act of choosing what to notice changes experience. If someone focuses on what frustrates them, they find frustration. If they focus on what interests them, they find curiosity. The attention directs the step, and the step influences the attention. The mind walks itself in circles, and the circles become paths. The idea of the traveler shaping the path while the path shapes the traveler is not abstract. It appears in ordinary daily movement. A child learning language shapes how they speak by listening. The language they hear shapes how they think. Someone choosing a profession shapes their worldview. The work they perform shapes who they become. A person deciding how to respond to a moment shapes the moment. The moment shapes the person who responds. The path is not separate from the traveler. The traveler is not separate from the path. Movement shapes identity. Identity shapes movement. The traveler walks and is walked in return. An echo that outlives the sound refers to an effect that continues after its cause is gone. The cause ends, but the influence remains. This happens in physical sound. You speak in a large hall. The sound waves bounce off the walls. You stop speaking, yet the room keeps carrying your voice for a moment. The echo lingers. The source is silent. The effect persists. The same shake appears in human experience, where causes pass, but their traces continue. Think of how someone may remember a sentence spoken years before. The speaker may have forgotten it, but the listener still holds it. The sound became memory. The memory became belief, behavior, or identity. The echo outlasted the voice. Consider a child who receives encouragement at a young age. A teacher or parent tells them, "You can figure things out." The child carries that message into adulthood. When they face challenges, the phrase returns internally. The teacher may no longer be present. The situation that led to the words may be forgotten. The echo remains and supports the person long after the moment has passed. The cause is gone. The effect continues. The opposite can happen as well. Someone may hear a harsh word spoken in frustration. The speaker moves on. The moment ends, but the one who heard it may repeat it in their own mind. They may think the criticism describes something true about them. They may carry it for decades. The echo becomes part of how they see themselves. The speaker has changed, forgotten, or grown. The echo continues to shape the listener. Actions work this way too. A small act of generosity can shift how someone sees their place in the world. A person may receive kindness during a difficult time and later offer kindness to others. The original event ends. The behavior it shaped extends forward. The echo travels through other lives. Culture holds echoes on a larger scale. Traditions continue long after the original reason for them is unknown. A holiday may begin for one purpose, and centuries later, people still observe it without knowing the first meaning. The origin has faded. The effect remains. The echo becomes the practice itself. This structure appears in habits. A person may develop a habit to cope with a past situation. The situation ends, but the habit continues. Someone may learn to stay quiet because speaking once led to trouble. Years later, when the danger no longer exists, the habit persists. The echo remains even though the original cause is gone. When the person notices the habit, they may need to look backward to understand why it formed. Memory shows this clearly. When someone remembers a painful event, the memory can bring back the emotional state even if the event has been resolved. The body responds to the memory as though it is happening now. The original moment does not return. The echo moves forward through the nervous system. The mind reacts to something that is no longer present. The echo outlives the sound. Stories carry echoes as well. When someone reads a book or watches a film that resonates with them, the images and ideas can remain long after the story ends. The person may recall certain scenes at unexpected times. The narrative becomes part of their thought. The book sits closed on a shelf. The echo continues in the mind. The same applies to choices. A decision made in one moment can shape the next year or decade of someone's life. The choice takes a second. The effects grow over time. If someone chooses to move to a new place, the choice ends once it is made. But the relationships, experiences, and understanding that arise from the move unfold long after. The echo becomes the lived life. Even thought loops follow this structure. A person may think a certain thought often enough that the thought continues to appear on its own. The original trigger may no longer matter. The pattern sustains itself. The echo has become its own source. In relationships, the echo is visible in how people respond based on past interactions. If someone has been treated with care, they may expect warmth and trust easily. If they have been treated with neglect, they may expect distance or dismissal, even when no one is offering either. The past shapes the present. The original relationship may be long gone. The echo remains in expectations, reactions, and assumptions. Nature contains echoes too. When wind shapes a desert dune, the wind may stop, but the dune remains. When a river carves a canyon, the flow may change course, but the shape of the land remains. The cause ends, the form stays. The world is filled with structures created by forces no longer active. In personal reflection, noticing echoes requires patience. Someone may ask themselves why they react strongly to something small. The answer may lie in something that happened long ago. The reaction is not to the current situation. It is to the echo. When this is seen, the person may understand that they are responding to the past, not the present. The echo can be understood, and sometimes, when understood, it begins to fade. At other times, the echo does not need to fade. Some echoes support growth, some give strength. A person may remember encouragement, affection, simple presence. These remain available even when the people involved are no longer near. The moments continue to shape life. The echo is not only a reminder of what was, it becomes part of who the person is. The echo that outlives the sound shows how effects do not depend on their causes remaining in place. Causes pass, moments end, but what they shape continues. The world, the mind, and relationships all hold traces that move forward long after the sound has stopped. The idea of handwriting without a hand points to a pattern that forms without a clear author. It describes situations where something appears intentional, yet no single person created it. The pattern emerges through many small actions, none of which seem like they were meant to produce the final result. When we see the pattern later, it looks planned, but when we look for the planner, we find no one. The writing exists, the hand is missing. This happens in language. No one invented a language all at once. People spoke, repeated sounds, adjusted phrases, borrowed ways of speaking, and refined meaning over time. The language grew from usage. It carried structure, grammar, and expression, yet there was no architect who designed it. If someone tries to find the first person who decided how sentences should work, they will find there is no such person. The rules formed through unplanned interaction. The system is the handwriting, and the community is not a single hand, but many hands moving without a single author. Culture follows this same pattern. Clothing styles, customs, greetings, humor, and rhythm change over time. People adopt what seems natural around them. They imitate peers. They react to new circumstances. A custom may become standard without anyone deciding it should. The pattern builds itself. When someone enters the culture, the pattern feels like it has always been there. But if we trace it back, we do not find a starting point with a designer. The form emerged. The handwriting has no hand. Consider how cities develop. A city rarely matches a single plan. People build homes. Roads appear to connect homes. Shops open where people gather. Over decades, the layout takes shape. The paths that people walk most often become main streets. If someone looks at a map long after, the pattern appears intentional. But the city's shape reflects thousands of decisions made for practical reasons, not a master design. The structure appears purposeful. The origin is distributed among many acts. The handwriting without a hand becomes visible in stone and street. This pattern exists in personal identity. A person may look back on their life and see a consistent character. They may describe themselves as someone who is patient, curious, severe, or warm. But if they try to identify the moment these traits began, they cannot. Each trait developed through repeated situations. A person acted, reacted, adjusted, and formed habits. No single moment declared the identity. The identity formed over time without a defining author. The self is a pattern shaped by many small events. The handwriting took shape without a single hand guiding it. Even thought works this way. Thoughts arise without being chosen. They appear, connect, and dissolve. The mind observes them, yet the mind did not choose them deliberately. A person might try to find the source of a thought. They ask, where did that come from? The answer is unclear. The mind produces thoughts from memory, sensation, association, and habit. The thinker does not stand outside the thoughts. The thoughts emerge inside the same system that observes them. The writing appears without an author directing each line. Nature provides another clear example. Snowflakes form with detailed structure. Each one is unique. No mind chooses the shape. The pattern emerges from temperature, humidity, and molecular geometry. Ferns grow with fractal structure. The plant does not decide to express a pattern. The pattern appears because physical laws shape growth. The result looks intentional. The hand is the system itself. Social behavior can form patterns without deliberate planning. Consider how traffic flows. Each driver makes individual decisions, yet patterns appear. Congestion at certain points, rush hours, predictable slowdowns. The system behaves like a living structure. If you watch from above, the motion resembles waves or currents. but no one controls it directly. The handwriting appears from many unrelated choices. This also occurs in beliefs. People inherit ideas from family, school, and culture. They may believe something strongly without knowing where the belief began. They repeat it. Others around them repeat it. Over time, the belief becomes part of shared understanding. When someone asks who first said it or decided it, there is no answer. The belief wrote itself into the collective mind. The handwriting without a hand becomes the shared worldview. Artists sometimes describe creating a piece without feeling like they are making deliberate choices. They say the work came through them, or that they were following something rather than inventing it. The art feels like it emerged on its own. The artist acted, but the artist did not feel like the author. The process revealed something already forming. The handwriting appeared through the movement of the hand, but the sense of origin was absent. You can see the same structure in personal routines. Someone may act in certain ways without knowing why. They might always stand in the same corner of a room or choose the same type of food. They did not plan these habits. The habits formed from repetition. The pattern wrote itself into behavior. When someone becomes aware of these patterns, they may feel surprised. They may notice that many parts of life were not chosen deliberately. The relationships, preferences, goals, and reactions emerged gradually. The awareness does not erase the pattern. It makes the pattern visible. The handwriting remains. The lack of a clear author remains as well. This observation does not imply randomness. Patterns that form without a single author are still structured. They result from interaction, environment, repetition, and feedback. The absence of a single origin does not mean the system lacks coherence. It means the coherence came from many small acts accumulating. The handwriting is real. The hand is nowhere to be found as a single source. The idea of handwriting without a hand points to how many systems, behaviors, and identities are self-organizing. They arise from participation, not command. They unfold through time, not through intention. The pattern that emerges stands as something coherent, even though no one can claim to have authored it alone. A program that rewrites its own code describes a system that changes itself while it runs. In ordinary programming, code is written first and executed afterward. The instructions remain fixed unless a programmer edits them. But some programs adjust their behavior as they operate. They monitor their own performance, examine their structure, and change their instructions. The program becomes both the one acting and the one shaping the action. The boundary between the code and the coder becomes unclear. This idea reflects a broader pattern in life and mind. Systems can modify themselves. They learn from their own behavior and update the rules they follow. The change happens from within. There is no outside agent directing the revision. The system observes itself, interprets what it sees, and adjusts. The result is a loop in which the observer and the observed are the same. The mind works this way. A person forms beliefs about the world. Those beliefs influence how they interpret events. The interpretation can confirm or reshape the beliefs. The belief system rewrites itself through experience. If someone grows up believing the world is unsafe, they may interpret neutral situations as threatening. Their thoughts support the belief, but if they encounter a safe environment repeatedly, they may begin to adjust. The new experiences rewrite the internal code. The system updates itself. Language acquisition also follows this pattern. A child learns words by hearing them. They do not start with rules of grammar. They listen, imitate, and adjust. Their brain generates patterns from speech. Those patterns guide future speech. The child hears themselves speak, notices the reactions of others, and modifies how they speak next time. The language system forms itself. The code is changed by its own output. Memory reflects the same dynamic. When someone recalls an event, they do not retrieve a fixed recording. The memory changes slightly during recall. It blends with present understanding, mood, and context. The next time the memory is recalled, it reflects the revised version. The system updates itself each time it is accessed. The act of remembering rewrites the stored memory. The code changes during execution. Habits form through repeated actions. When a person performs an action and receives a certain outcome, their brain strengthens the neural pathways that produced the action. If the outcome changes, the brain adjusts the pathway. This is reinforcement learning. The structure that produces behavior changes in response to behavior. The code rewrites itself. This pattern can also be seen in relationships. Two people interact in a certain way. Their interactions create expectations. The expectations influence future interactions. Over time, the relationship develops a character of its own. If the people in the relationship notice the pattern, they may choose to change it. They speak differently, respond differently, and behave differently. The relationship updates itself. The system revises its own code. In software engineering, self-modifying code can be useful, but also difficult to manage. It allows flexibility, but it also introduces unpredictability. The same is true in life. When a system rewrites itself, the direction of change cannot be fully predicted. Experience shapes identity, and identity shapes experience. The loop does not lead to a single fixed outcome. It remains open. An example can clarify this. Imagine someone who always seeks approval. They act in ways that make others happy. They do this because they once learned that approval kept them safe or valued. The behavior becomes part of their identity. They say, "I am someone who tries to please others." But if they notice how this pattern limits them, they might experiment with saying no or expressing their own preferences. The first attempts may feel uncomfortable, yet these attempts can alter how they see themselves. They discover that their worth does not depend entirely on approval. The belief changes, the identity shifts. The program rewrites its code in response to its own output. This can also happen at a collective level. A community might hold a shared belief or tradition. The belief shapes behavior. The behavior reinforces the belief. But if conditions change, the belief may start to shift. Members may question the old rules. The community may respond by adopting new practices. The shared understanding updates itself. The code changes from within. The strange loop in self-modifying systems appears when the system must use itself as both subject and object. The brain tries to understand the brain. The self tries to understand the self. The system observes itself and uses the observation to change itself. The observer cannot step outside the observation. The code that performs the modification is the same code being modified. This creates a loop that does not have a clear top or bottom. Some people encounter this loop in moments of self-reflection. They ask, "Who am I?" The answer changes as they ask. The act of asking changes the one asking. They may notice traits they had not seen. They may reconsider assumptions about themselves. The identity shifts while being examined. The code rewrites itself in real time. Learning often works this way. When someone learns something new, the learning changes how they learn in the future. The acquisition of knowledge changes the structure that acquires knowledge. A A student who learns how to think critically develops a new way of approaching information. That way of thinking becomes part of the toolset that interprets new experiences. The learning process improves itself as it proceeds. Self-modifying systems do not rely on a single moment of transformation. They shift gradually, sometimes without notice. A person who practices patience each day may wake up months later and realize they respond calmly to situations that once upset them. The identity changed through repetition. The system updated itself without needing a single breakthrough. The program that rewrites its own code describes a form of development that happens from within. Growth unfolds through feedback. Understanding deepens through reflection. Behavior reforms through awareness. The system learns by watching itself and responding to what it sees. The mask that forgets the face describes a moment when the role someone plays grows so strong that it becomes difficult to remember who existed before the role. A mask is usually something one can put on and take off. It is a surface used for a purpose. A face is what exists beneath, something lived rather than chosen. But roles can become so familiar that they take the place of identity. The person begins to act the role, not just in public, but in private as well. The distinction between who responds and what is expected to respond becomes unclear. Consider someone who becomes known as the responsible one in their family or workplace. At first, they step into that role because it feels needed. They help, they organize, they stay calm. People thank them, rely on them, and expect consistency. Over time, the role begins to shape how they see themselves. They may feel that they cannot show uncertainty or ask for help because doing so would break the image others have of them. They may begin to believe that asking for support means failure. The role becomes the primary identity. The mask has begun to forget the face beneath it. This can happen in the opposite direction as well. Someone may have been labeled as the one who cannot be relied on. If they hear this enough, they may begin to act according to the expectation, even when they want to act differently. The role becomes a script that guides behavior. The original person fades behind the performance. Social environments reinforce roles. When people interact repeatedly, they often fall into recognizable patterns. One person speaks more, another listens. One comforts, the other confides. These roles can form for practical reasons, but habit can make them feel fixed. If the person who listens one day needs someone to listen to them, they may find it difficult to express that need. The mask continues even when the situation changes. Identity itself can feel like a role. The self-concept someone holds may have formed in reaction to past events, rather than from personal choice. A person may believe they are shy, aggressive, agreeable, distant, or ambitious because they repeated a pattern of behavior in adolescence, and the pattern became part of how they describe themselves. If they look for the origin of the trait, they may find that the cause is no longer present, yet the behavior continues. The mask remains. In relationships, roles can become even more pronounced. Two people may fall into patterns where one always apologizes and the other always forgives, or one always explains and the other always listens. If the balance shifts, discomfort may arise. The relationship expects the pattern. When a pattern persists long enough, the individuals inside it can forget that other ways of relating are possible. The mask sits in place for both people. Work roles can shape personality in similar ways. Someone who works in a position that requires constant assertiveness may carry that tone into their personal life. Someone who is expected to be cheerful in public may find it hard to admit unhappiness, even to themselves. The role becomes something automatic. The face beneath is not lost, but it grows quiet. The same pattern can be seen in emotional habits. A person who learns to hide sadness may forget how to express it. The mask of strength becomes the only visible surface. Another person may learn to use humor to avoid discomfort. Over time, humor becomes a reflex. The underlying feelings do not disappear. They become harder to reach. The mask becomes the familiar expression, and the face behind it becomes distant. This does not mean the mask is always harmful. Sometimes a role offers stability during uncertain times. A person may act confident to handle a challenge and later grow into that confidence. The mask can support development. But when the mask becomes rigid, when it is maintained even when it no longer serves the person wearing it, the separation between role and identity becomes unclear. To notice this, someone might pay attention to moments when they feel tired after social interaction. Not physical tiredness, but the feeling of holding something in place. They may notice how certain environments require a particular version of themselves. They may notice that switching between roles feels like changing costumes. When the shift becomes automatic, the person may no longer recognize which version feels most natural. The mask forgets the face when the performance becomes unconscious. A person may respond according to expectation rather than genuine feeling. They may answer, "I'm fine," before even checking if it is true. They may act calm when they feel afraid. They may act certain when they feel unsure. The role speaks first. Awareness does not require rejecting the role. It requires noticing the space between the role and the one playing it. Someone may ask themselves, "When did I begin acting this way?" They may trace the role back to earlier experiences. They may see how it formed to meet a need. The mask was not a mistake. It was a solution at the time. But circumstances change. What protected someone once may constrain them now. A child who became quiet to avoid conflict may still be quiet as an adult, even when conflict is no longer present. The quietness becomes identity. The origin becomes distant. The mask continues to act. When someone recognizes this, they may test small changes. They speak slightly more honestly. They ask for help in a small way. They allow themselves to pause before responding in the usual pattern. These moments reveal the face behind the mask. The person may feel unfamiliar at first, as if they are meeting themselves again. The mask that forgets the face is not an error. It is a process of adaptation that continued past its need. The face does not disappear. It waits beneath the familiar shape of the role, patient until the person notices it again. A voice that listens describes a moment when speaking and hearing are not separate acts. In ordinary conversation, one person speaks and another listens. There is a clear direction. But when a person turns inward, the voice they use to think is also the ear that hears those thoughts. The speaker and the listener are the same. The dialogue folds inward, and the mind holds both roles at once. This becomes clear when someone talks to themselves silently. They might ask, "Why did I do that?" The question seems directed at someone, Yet the one who answers is the same one who asked. The mind produces a question and then responds to it, as though two people are present. But there are not two people. There is only one process that contains both sides of conversation. The voice that speaks is the same voice that listens. People often think of their thoughts as something they hear. They say things like, "A thought came to me," as though the thought arrived from somewhere else. But the thought was produced by the mind that now observes it. The mind splits itself into narrator and audience. Most of the time, this happens without awareness. The inner voice comments on life, decisions, memories, and fears. The same mind hears these comments and reacts. The voice and the listener move in a loop. Consider when someone faces uncertainty. They may say to themselves, "You should be calm," or "You need to decide." The internal voice gives guidance, as though it is separate from the one receiving it. But the guidance is part of the same thinking process. The mind creates instruction and then follows it, and the sense of two sides arises. The voice that listens hears itself. This loop can bring clarity. A person may talk themselves through a difficult moment. They may speak kindly to themselves when they are in distress. The internal voice can guide the listener toward a calmer state. The one who speaks and the one who hears work together. Even though they are the same person, the structure of dialogue helps sort thoughts. But the same loop can cause confusion. If the internal voice is critical, harsh, or fearful, the listener may believe the message is true simply because they heard it. They might think, "I'm not capable," or "I always fail," and hear these statements as facts instead of thoughts. The voice speaks and the listener reacts, even though both belong to the same mind. The form of dialogue gives the message weight. This becomes especially strong when someone tries to change a habit. If they want to act differently, they may tell themselves, "I should stop doing this." The voice gives commands, but the listener may not feel able to follow. The internal divide grows. One part feels like the critic. The other part feels like the one being judged. The conflict occurs within a single person, but it feels like a conversation between two sides. This inward dialogue can be observed during meditation. When someone sits quietly, they may notice thoughts appearing one after another. If they listen closely, they may hear a voice narrating even simple experiences. "I am sitting. This is boring. I want to move. I should focus." The mind comments on itself. And if the person watches, they may see that the one who hears the commentary is not separate from the one generating it. The loop becomes visible. The same structure appears in self-reflection. When someone writes in a journal, they express thoughts as if speaking to another. But the one who reads the words later is the same person who wrote them. The past self speaks to the present self. The dialogue stretches through time. The voice that listens is shaped by the voice that spoke before. Relationships can influence this internal dialogue. If someone grows up hearing reassurance, their internal voice may sound encouraging. If they grow up hearing criticism, their internal voice may echo those tones. The listener inside them learns how to respond from the voices outside them. The dialogue that folds inward carries the weight of past interactions. The same pattern shows when someone practices empathy. If they speak to another person and listen carefully, they may notice that they begin to hear echoes of the other person's voice inside their own mind later. The internal dialogue extends to include the perspectives of others. The voice that listens becomes a blend of personal history and shared experience. People sometimes try to find their true voice, believing that beneath the internal dialogue, there is a more authentic speaker. They might think the commentary in their mind is something separate from who they are, but the internal voice is shaped by life, memory, culture, and feeling. The one who speaks and the one who hears are expressions of the same ongoing process of experience. The loop becomes most noticeable when silence enters. If someone stops speaking internally for a moment, they may notice that the listener remains. Awareness continues even when the internal voice pauses. The ability to hear does not depend on talking. The listening presence remains. This can create a sense of spaciousness. The voice that listens is deeper than the one that comments. Consider a moment when someone watches a sunset without thinking. They see the colors, the shapes, the light. There is no narrator explaining the scene. The mind rests. The listener is present. The speaker is silent. The dialogue is not needed. This shows that the listening presence exists before the commentary begins. But when thought returns, the speaker and listener merge again. The commentary resumes. The internal conversation picks up where it left off. The dialogue does not start from nothing. It resumes the loop. The voice that listens is not an error or a mistake. It reflects the structure of awareness, observing itself. The speaker and listener arise from the same source. The dialogue happens inside one continuous mind, which holds both the words and the hearing of them. The image of a library with a book that contains the library points to a structure where a world holds a description of itself. It is a setting in which the catalog includes an entry for the catalog, and the story includes a record of the story's own creation. It is not only a metaphor for language or imagination, it is also a picture of how systems hold representations of themselves inside themselves. The world nests within the world, and the container includes a model of the container. Imagine walking through a quiet library. You move past shelves that hold histories, explanations, fiction, and instruction. Each book describes part of the world outside it. The building seems separate from the contents, but then somewhere on a shelf, there is a book that describes the building itself. It lists the architecture, the cataloging system, the placement of shelves, and the way books are arranged. Inside the library is a book that contains the library. You could read the book while sitting inside the space it describes. The outer world and the inner world reflect one another. The boundary becomes thin. This structure can be found in thought. The mind observes the world, but it also builds thoughts about itself. A person can think about how they think. The mind stores representations of its own processes. Someone might say, "I tend to worry," or "I am patient." The statement is not describing something outside the self. It is the mind describing the mind. The book contains the library, but the mind that created the description also reads it and adjusts itself in response. The system loops. Language carries this pattern too. Dictionaries contain definitions of words, but the words used to define those words are themselves defined in the same dictionary. The dictionary explains itself using itself. Each definition refers to other definitions. The entire structure forms a closed system that points inward, even as it describes outward meaning. Language uses language to define language. The catalog contains its own organizing principles. This pattern also appears in stories. Some stories include characters who read or write the very story they are in. A novel may describe a book written by one of its characters about the events of the novel itself. The story bends inward. The reader watches the narrative reflect its own shape. The world inside the book holds a copy of the world outside the book. The library contains the book that contains the library. People experience this when they ask, "Who am I?" and then try to answer using memories, roles, and patterns that were formed by the same self asking the question. The identity seeking to understand itself uses the structures built by its own history. The search for self-awareness loops through the same system that produced the self. The self reads a book about itself while being the writer of the book. Society reflects this pattern in culture. Culture shapes individuals, and individuals shape culture. A community passes down stories, beliefs, and values. Those teachings influence how members think and act. The collective behavior then reinforces or changes the culture. The catalog includes the instructions for its own continuation. The book and the library evolve together. Science contains this loop as well. When scientists study the universe, they use tools and reasoning formed within the universe. The model of reality is built using the same physical laws it seeks to describe. When scientists study the brain, they use the brain to study the brain. The library studies the book that describes the library. The reflection is inescapable. Even maps can demonstrate this structure. A map represents a territory, but sometimes a map includes a representation of the map itself within that territory. For example, a museum map may show a small icon marking "You are here." That point contains the location of the map reading the map. The space and the representation overlap. The viewer stands inside the picture that includes the viewer. Art often reveals this directly. A painting may depict an artist painting the painting, or a film may show a filmmaker making the film the viewer is watching. The medium includes a reflection of itself. The viewer sees the world folding inward. The creative act becomes part of its own subject. Memory works similarly. When someone remembers remembering something, the memory contains a reflection of itself. A person may recall not just the event, but also the last time they remembered the event. Memory builds layers. The book contains versions of itself across time. This nested structure appears in simple daily experience. When someone explains who they are to another person, they choose which parts of their identity to highlight. But the explanation itself becomes part of how they understand who they are. Tell the story enough times, and the story shapes the identity. The description becomes part of what is being described. The same occurs in learning. When someone learns how they learn best, the knowledge influences how they continue to learn. The learning process contains a model of itself. A student may realize they understand better when they speak aloud. That realization shapes future learning. The learner and the learned material form a loop. In relationships, two people form impressions of each other, and those impressions guide how they interact. The interaction reinforces the impression. A person who thinks another is distant may act cautiously, and the cautious action may cause the other to appear distant. The relationship contains a model of the relationship. The catalog shapes the contents, and the contents reinforce the catalog. The library with the book containing the library illustrates how systems hold internal images of themselves. The world does not simply exist. It includes awareness of itself. The structure of understanding forms loops, reflections, and recursions. The spaces we inhabit hold maps of themselves, and we use those maps to navigate the very spaces that produce them. The sentence ending before it begins points to a structure that folds back on itself so tightly that the start and the end cannot be separated. It describes statements or concepts that undermine themselves in the act of being spoken. A simple example is the phrase, "This sentence is false." If it is true, then it must be false. If it is false, then it must be true. The meaning collapses into a loop. It does not hold together. The logic cancels itself. These structures appear in language, but they also appear in thought, identity, and belief. They show how certain ideas cannot stand alone because their shape requires something they remove. The sentence that ends before it begins collapses not because of complexity, but because of contradiction built into its form. Consider someone who says, "I never speak." The statement comes from speaking. To assert the claim means the claim is already broken. The act contradicts the content. The logic collapses. The sentence points to a world that cannot hold the sentence itself. Many people experience this pattern in internal dialogue. Someone might say to themselves, "I must stop overthinking everything." But the moment they try to stop, they think about stopping. The attempt is the continuation of what they are trying to stop. The action contradicts the desired result. It cancels itself. The effort keeps the problem alive. This form appears often in emotional life. Someone may say, "I don't care what others think of me," but they say it with emphasis, as if trying to convince someone. The insistence reveals that they care about the appearance of not caring. The claim folds back into its opposite. The meaning dissolves in the loop. Self-referential statements like these show how some thoughts cannot be separated from the act of thinking them. The form of the idea and the act of expressing it are linked. When the message contradicts the action, the structure collapses inward. In philosophy, this form is sometimes described as a paradox, but it shows up in daily life without requiring complex reasoning. It shows up when someone tries to use force to create peace within themselves. They push away discomfort and, in pushing, create more discomfort. The instruction cancels the intended result. The sentence ends before it begins. Habits work this way when they try to correct themselves. Someone may struggle with insomnia. They lie in bed and think, "I need to sleep now." But the intensity of needing sleep increases alertness. The attempt prevents the outcome. The logic turns inward and collapses. Another example appears in trust. A person may tell themselves, "I will trust once I am certain." But trust is something that happens before certainty. Waiting for certainty cancels the possibility of trust. The requirement removes what it claims to seek. This pattern can be observed in communication between people. If someone says, "Be spontaneous," the instruction prevents spontaneity. Spontaneity cannot be commanded. The moment it is expected or required, it disappears. The idea dissolves as soon as it is spoken. The same shape appears in identity. If someone forms their identity around not being influenced by others, the identity is shaped by reaction to others. The independence depends on what it opposes. The identity collapses into dependence on the thing it rejects. The sentence ends before it begins. A person might say, "I refuse to define myself," but refusing to define oneself becomes a definition. The act of rejection produces the structure it tries to avoid. The self-description folds back on itself and empties its meaning. Logic follows similar patterns. Some statements cannot be evaluated as true or false because the evaluation changes the content. When a system tries to describe itself completely, the description becomes part of the system. The boundary disappears. A statement that tries to stand outside the system ends up inside it. The start and end collapse. This structure also appears in thought processes that turn inward without resolution. For example, Someone might say, I must understand everything I feel before I can act. But some understanding only develops through action. Waiting for complete clarity blocks the path to clarity. The beginning cancels the end, and the structure folds. You can see this in creative work. Someone may want their work to be perfect before they begin. The desire for perfection prevents starting. The creation ends before it begins. The sentence stops itself. It has no room to move because its own requirement is too tight. These loops appear in relationships as well. Someone might say, I will open up once I feel safe. But emotional safety grows through openness. Waiting blocks the conditions needed for what is desired. The sentence prevents itself from becoming real. Even time can be caught in this pattern. Someone may wait to live their life until they feel ready, but readiness comes from living. The moment is delayed again and again. The start removes itself. The ending is already present in the decision to wait. The structure of collapse can also be seen in memory. Someone may try to recall something they know well, but trying too hard makes the memory harder to reach. When they stop trying, the memory returns. The effort cancels the result. The sentence ends before it begins. In thinking, these loops often hide underneath ordinary language. They feel natural, like normal reasoning, but when noticed closely, the logic breaks down. The content and the act of expressing the content contradict each other. The meaning cancels itself. The sentence ending before it begins is not just a curiosity of language. It reflects a common shape of human thought. The mind tries to control itself with the same tools it is trying to control. The system tries to step outside itself, but cannot. It tries to remove something while using the same structure that holds it. The collapse is not failure. It's a sign that some forms of movement cannot happen through force or command. Some changes occur only when the loop is seen clearly. When someone recognizes that the attempt cancels the outcome, the loop loses its grip. The sentence is still there, but its structure is understood. The eye turned inward describes a kind of seeing that does not look outward toward objects, landscapes, or events, but instead looks at the one who is looking. It is the moment when sight does not seek something else, but meets itself. Ordinary sight begins at the surface of the world. It moves from the observer outward, reaching what is seen. But when the eye turns inward, the direction reverses. The gaze meets the mind that sends it. The one who sees becomes the one being seen. This happens not by force, but by noticing. If someone sits quietly and watches their own thoughts, they are looking with the eye turned inward. The thoughts move across attention like shapes passing through a field of view. A thought appears, holds itself for a moment, and fades. The watcher does not choose most of these thoughts. They arrive on their own. The eye sees the mind as it works. The mind becomes both landscape and observer. This inward sight is different from analysis. Analysis breaks ideas apart and tries to explain them. It works like cutting something open to understand it. The eye turned inward does not dissect. It notices. It watches without trying to change what it sees. When someone tries to change what they see while looking inward, the seeing becomes effort. The observation becomes interference. The mind begins talking about itself rather than observing itself. Imagine someone looking into a still pond. If the water is calm, the reflection is clear. If they reach into the water to improve the reflection, they disturb the surface. The image breaks. The mind works the same way. When someone tries to control what they see inside, the act of control disrupts the seeing. But when they let the mind be as it is, the reflection clarifies. The eye turned inward watches without judgment. This form of seeing often arises in times of quiet. Someone may be resting and notice a feeling of tension in the chest. If they look inward, they might ask, not with words but with attention. What is this? The eye observes the feeling without telling it to change. The feeling might shift or stay. The observation does not demand an outcome. The seeing itself is enough. A gaze and the observed experience belong to the same field. People sometimes misunderstand inward sight as withdrawing from life. They imagine that to look inward means to ignore the world. But the opposite can happen. When someone sees themselves clearly, they act in the world with less confusion. If they know when they are reacting from fear, they do not need to follow the fear. If they notice when they want approval, they can act without needing to earn it. The eye turned inward does not remove engagement from life. It clarifies the one who engages. This inward sight can reveal habits that were invisible before. Someone may notice that when they speak to others, they often adjust their tone to avoid conflict. They may notice that they hurry, even when there is no need to hurry. They may see that they hold their breath when they feel uncertain. None of these behaviors were chosen consciously. They were formed through past events. The eye turned inward makes these patterns visible, and once visible, they can shift. Inward sight can also reveal how emotions arise and pass. A person may notice that anger begins as a tightening in the chest or jaw before the mind forms words about it. They may notice that sadness has a weight before it has a story. The sense comes first. The explanation comes after. When this is seen, the relationship to emotion changes. The person no longer needs to take every thought that comes with emotion as fact. The emotion becomes something that arises, moves, and fades. The observer watches. The eye turned inward can also see the act of seeing itself. Someone may notice that awareness is always present before any thought appears. They may see that attention moves on its own at times, settling on sound, sensation, or memory. When the attention is looked at, the one doing the looking cannot be found as an object. The observer is not something that can be seen as a thing. The seeing is the observer. It is presence rather than form. This can feel like standing at the threshold of understanding something that does not need words. The mind becomes more quiet, not because someone forced it to be quiet, but because the one who watches no longer tries to change what is seen. The relationship to thought loosens. Thought continues. But it does not hold the same weight. The inward gaze holds the seeing itself. This inward sight can shift how someone relates to identity. The sense of "I am this kind of person" can soften. Instead of a fixed identity, there is a flow of habits, feelings, memories, and responses. These do not define the one who is seeing them. The eye turned inward sees that identities are patterns rather than solid truths. The person does not disappear. The idea of the person becomes less rigid. This can bring a sense of calm. Not the calm of escape, but the calm of being able to watch without needing to fix. It allows someone to experience themselves without forcing themselves to match an image. The seeing makes room. The eye turned inward does not claim anything new. It reveals what has been present all along. Awareness has always been here, even when ignored. The gaze that looks outward is the gaze that can look inward. The seeing is continuous. The difference is direction. When the eye turns inward, the world does not disappear. The world includes the one who sees it. Music inside the silence refers to patterns that come forward only when noise drops away. It points to forms that are present but unnoticed until attention becomes quiet enough to recognize them. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the space in which sound becomes clear. In the same way, stillness in the mind allows subtle patterns of thought, feeling, or awareness to show themselves. The pattern seems to emerge from emptiness, yet it was there all along. Silence does not create the music, it reveals it. Consider a room after conversation ends. The voices stop, and at first the silence feels empty. But if someone listens longer, they might hear the faint hum of electricity, the distant sound of traffic, or the soft movement of their own breath. These sounds were present even when the room was filled with speaking, but the speaking covered them. The silence does not add anything new. It removes what was blocking what was already here. The music inside the silence becomes audible. The same process occurs in the mind. When thoughts run continuously, they overlap and drown one another out. One thought begins before the previous one ends. The mind feels crowded. If the person pauses and watches, the thoughts slow. The spaces between thoughts become clearer. In those spaces, something else becomes noticeable. A quiet awareness that was present before the thoughts and remains after they settle. The silence between thoughts contains the sense of simply being. The music inside the silence is the experience of awareness itself, unfiltered. People often believe that meaning comes from words, yet words only make sense because they are placed within silence. If someone spoke without any gaps, the speech would become noise. The pause shapes the sentence. The silence structures expression. Without silence, words would not be heard. Without stillness, movement would not be seen. Silence makes pattern visible. This can be seen in music directly. A melody is not only the notes, it is the pauses between the notes. If a musician played a piece with no rests, the shape of the piece would vanish. The silence gives contour, rhythm, and timing. A single held pause can change the emotional weight of a song. The silence is not empty. It carries meaning. The same structure appears in daily life. When someone moves from task to task without pause, the day may feel continuous and blurred. But if they take even a moment to breathe, the pause separates one moment from another. The pause gives form. The silence allows the experience of living to register. Silence also reveals emotional patterns. When someone sits quietly, without distraction, feelings surface. They may notice sadness, fear, curiosity, or peace that was hidden beneath activity. The silence did not cause the feeling. The stillness allowed it to be seen. Many people avoid silence because they believe it is empty. But what they fear is not the silence itself. It is the feelings that silence reveals. Yet not all feelings that rise in silence are heavy. There is also a subtle sense of presence that can arise, something simple and steady. It does not need explanation. It does not require reason. It feels like the quiet center beneath everything else. The music inside the silence can feel like a return to something familiar and unchanged. This inner music can be observed when spending time in nature. Sitting in a forest or near water, someone may notice that the mind gradually settles. The external sounds are steady and nothing demands response. The nervous system unwinds. The silence is not complete, but it is open enough to allow subtle things to come forward. The person may feel themselves breathing in rhythm with the environment. The music inside the silence appears as a sense of belonging. This dynamic also shows up in communication. In conversation, people often rush to fill silence because they feel uncomfortable. But silence can allow understanding. When one person pauses before responding, they give themselves time to feel the weight of what was said. The silence lets the meaning land. A pause becomes part of the dialogue. When two people share silence comfortably, it signals trust. The absence of words becomes its own expression. In relationships, silence can show whether connection exists beyond activity. If two people can sit quietly together without tension, the connection holds on its own. There is no need to perform. The silence becomes music shared between them. This is not a silence of avoidance or distance. It is a silence of presence. Silence also plays a role in creativity. Many ideas emerge when someone steps away from active problem solving. A solution appears while resting, walking, or sitting quietly. The mind shifts out of effort and into openness. The quiet allows connections to form that were blocked by strain. The music inside the silence appears when the mind stops pushing. Even identity can be seen differently in silence. When someone stops telling themselves who they are or how they should be, something simpler takes shape. They might notice they are not only their roles or their thoughts. Something steady remains beneath those layers. The silence makes room for a sense of self that is not constructed. The music inside the silence is the awareness that remains when stories fall quiet. Patterns that emerge from silence often feel familiar, yet difficult to describe. They do not need interpretation. They do not need to be framed as insight. They are direct. The silence reveals what was always present, though unnoticed. The quiet does not ask effort. It asks attention, and attention, when not pulled outward, turns inward and rests on what has always been there.